Good evening, everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. My name is Carmi Garzione, and I'm the Dean of the College of Science. And thank you for joining us for the second lecture in the Surprise Twists That Transformed Science lecture series. Before we begin tonight, I just want to ask you to please join me in giving tonight's musician, Laura Ruggles, another round of applause for that very powerful performance. I would like to thank our partners at the Main Gate Square and the Whoops Bake Shop on University Boulevard for providing the sweet treats handed out tonight for the first 500 of you in the door this evening. And I'm really happy and grateful to see so many of you sharing Valentine's Day with us. It's wonderful to see you all support your love of science. And in addition to Valentine's Day and Arizona statehood today, today is also the University of Arizona Giving Day. Giving Day is a 24-hour philanthropic campaign at the University of Arizona and an opportunity to enhance your support of our students and the programs that you value. This year, in addition to encouraging alumni to support departments from which they graduated, we are asking friends to consider giving to the College of Science General Scholarship Fund to help us retain students who aspire to do science but may need a little extra financial support to pursue their goals. We are very grateful for your support of our students. I would like to take a moment to recognize the Galileo Circle members in the audience tonight. The Galileo Circle is a valued community of individuals whose support is vital to the continued excellence of the College of Science at the University of Arizona. Thank you for your continued support of all of our students, faculty, and staff, and for being here with us tonight. I'd also like to thank the lecture series corporate sponsors and media partners, in particular the presenting series sponsors, Holualoa Companies, Raytheon, and the Research Corporation for Science Advancement. I would also like to give a big thank you to Arizona Arts Live for their partnership in helping to bring the lecture series to life in Centennial Hall. And I'd now like to invite Bo-John Lewis to the stage. In collaboration with the University of Arizona Poetry Center, each of our lectures will have an original poem crafted for the evening's talk. Bo-John is the author of the poetry collection Currents and the short story collection Sinking Bell. He's been awarded 2 American Book Awards, a MacDowell Fellowship, and an NEA Literature Fellowship. In addition to being a mentor at the Institute of American Indian Arts, Bo-John teaches here at the University of Arizona. Bo-John, the stage is yours.
Hello. This is a ghazal. It's in Arabic and Urdu form. Who planted the seed, plumb with doubt, with white flowers? It grows against time. An old friend wants gauze, her lover bleeds from the head. Happens all the time. Darkness collects light. I tell my daughter to sleep. She falls and stands up. Summer is hungry. What am I writing for now? Money, fame, or time? Old practitioners sit with arms crossed on their laps. Sweat beads their creased brows. Boys wear less than girls. Old way of saying spring's gone. It's time to grow with time. Atop Mount Lemmon, this hot city looks smaller. From here, I'm not lost. The citrus tree wilts, planted close to a brick wall, needs water and time. 2 lovers shed clothes, embrace in a wooded stream. My shadow trembles. Monsoons wait to come to creosote, dry and hot. Please more, one more time. A thought, a plan, I, Bo-John, unplanned, delivered into long boredom. Death is close, no doubt, vain as a summit, a trench, best to forget time. Thank you.
Thank you, Bojan. Your poem perfectly set the stage for tonight's talk. I would like to now introduce tonight's speaker, Charlotte Pearson. Charlotte joined the College of Science at the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research in 2013 after obtaining her PhD at the University of Reading in the United Kingdom and completing her postdoc work at Cornell University. Dr. Pearson is a geoarchaeologist and a dendrochronologist interested in developing new applications of the tree ring record to examine past human and environmental interactions, to improve the chronological framework, and to synchronize multiple lines of paleo-environmental evidence. Her current research takes new approaches to anchoring floating tree ring sequences, which you'll learn a little bit about tonight, while also contributing directly to international efforts to improve the radiocarbon calibration curve, which is a critical resource for all of the radiocarbon dating method community. Please join me in welcoming Charlotte Pearson to the stage.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. It's lovely to see you all. Happy Valentine's Day. Thank you so much for coming out to listen to this talk and to be part of this lecture series. So I'm really honored to be asked to present as part of this series. I love the title this year, The Twist That Transformed Science. That's my favorite thing about science, is the twists. So I'm really pleased to be able to talk to you about this tonight. And also I'm really proud to represent some amazing colleagues in the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research. As I talk about everything you need to know about dating but didn't want to ask. Now, we were going to go with this as the title for the talk, but it being Valentine's Day, there was a concern that people might not get exactly what they expected coming to the talk. Hopefully you've come here expecting to hear about tree rings, maybe a little bit about radiocarbon, and hopefully lots of twists. So let's start with an introduction to tree ring science. Tree ring science is known as dendrochronology, and this comes from the Greek for trees and time and the study of. And when we put a ring on it, what does it mean when a dendrochronologist puts a ring on it? Well, of course, it means a tree ring. But we're all familiar with tree rings, right? This is a completely familiar image for everyone in the room. But let's just think a little bit about what a tree ring actually is. So every year, trees in environments where you have a fixed growth season will put on a ring underneath the bark. So they start growing at the center and they grow out a little bit each year. And if we zoom in on what this looks like, you can see behind me the bark edge and the outermost growth ring. And that growth ring, the 1 year of growth, is that light and that dark couplet of cells. And let's zoom in on those cells and have a look at it close up under the microscope. And I love looking at wood under the microscope. And I remember the first time I looked at wood under the microscope, because I'm used to wood in everyday life. That's wood over there. But when you look down the microscope, it's magical because you see the cell structure. So what you're looking at here is a conifer. And if you imagine like a bundle of drinking straws and you're looking down at the top of those straws, that's kind of what you're seeing in the wood surface here. The tree ring starts to grow at this point, and it's light-colored because the walls of the cell at the start of growth are really thin, because the tree's just like, it's time to grow. I'm going to grow really fast. Here I go. I'm growing. And then as you get towards the end of the growth season, the cell walls start to thicken up, and you get this darker-colored band. So that takes you to the end of the growth, and that is your tree ring. That is your unit of growth, and you would not believe how much data you can get from each and every one of those tiny little cells. Okay, so the first thing we do is we start with that ring under the bark. And in some ways, it's the most important ring because it's the ring we know the date of because we cut the tree. And because we know the date of that ring under the bark, we also know the date of the one before it and the one before that, and so on all the way back to the pith, which in the case of this tree is 1894. So that tree was 129 years old. And that's a cool thing about trees. You know, here is an 11-year-old child, and she's standing with a 670-year-old tree, and she's looking at how time is organized. She's conceptualizing the time. She's seeing events. She's understanding and relating to time in different ways. And trees are great for that. They're great for bringing messages about time and about science in a very accessible way. But there's more we can do than just count the rings and tell you how old the tree was, of course. And you'll notice as you look at this, hopefully you'll notice that not all those tree rings are the same width and thickness. You hopefully notice that some of them are thinner, like this one. I'll light it up. And some of them are wider, like this one. And, of course, they are giving you a signal. They're showing you the influences of climate for a particular region on the growth of the tree. And it's like a barcode or a fingerprint for climate of a particular region. And so these patterns carry across from tree to tree to tree, all in that same growth area. And the narrow growth, as you would expect, the tree has narrow growth, the tree was struggling to grow. So it was a bad year. And if it's a big wide ring, the tree actually had everything it needed this year. It was a really good year, and it grew really well. And in the southwest, of course, that's going to have a lot to do with how much rain falls in that particular year. So, where next? Well, this is where we start our process. We find our living tree, and we take a sample from the living tree, and we measure the pattern in the sample from the living tree where we know the year of the ring under the bark because we just sampled it. And then we take that pattern, and we try and find another tree, maybe a slightly older tree, hopefully a slightly older tree, and we measure the pattern in that as well. So we end up with two patterns that overlap, and that means the second tree can have calendar dates too, because we just keep on counting. And that makes us a longer, a master series. And then, guess what? We find something a little older. And we get that pattern, and we try and overlap it, and we move backwards through time. And older, and older. And the longest tree ring record in the world is 12,460 years. So imagine that, 12,460 time capsules of environmental change through time. But it's not just about the environmental change. Any region where you have a long tree ring sequence like this, you have a good shot at dating anything made out of wood from the same region. So for example, say this region has a really nice old barn, and I want to know when the barn was constructed. As long as I can find some timbers where I can measure that zigzag tree ring pattern and match it against my master data set, I'm in good shape, and I can find a date for this barn. Maybe I can find a date for all the buildings on this particular site. Maybe I can find where they had to replace an area at one time period or another. So there's lots of ways we can kind of get into the development of sites just through the dates of the timbers that were used in construction. We can also date anything that humans have ever made out of wood. If you can see tree rings and they have some of that narrow and wide growth, you have a shot at dating it, be it a hand axe from 5,000 years ago or a violin from the 17th century. Or, in this case, my colleague Ian Tyers from the UK is looking at the edge of a panel painting. The edge of a panel painting actually can have a really large number of tree rings along it. And so when you have artifacts like paintings or violins, getting a date for them, you can answer two questions. You can answer, when was the wood cut? And you can answer, where did the wood come from? And when you're thinking about that in terms of people in the past, you can think about, well, you can think about trade. Where were people trading wood in the past? And of course, if it's something, say, for example, you think you have a Rembrandt in your attic and you like to have it tested by a dendrochronologist. Well, if we find a date that is 200 years later than Rembrandt, then that gives you an answer to whether it's a Rembrandt or not. So there are some interesting things you can get into with tree rings, including a lot of trouble if you get the wrong date for somebody's Rembrandt. Not to take you back to 2020, but we all kind of probably remember this, right? Not such a happy year. And if you went up Mount Lemmon afterwards, you would have seen trees that looked a bit like this, charred around the edges. So one of the things that my colleagues in the tree ring lab have done a lot of is looking at trees like this. So this is what you'd get if you cut through a tree like the one that you see on the screen up there that has these scars. And you see that inside it there's a number of dates because this tree has lived through multiple forest fires. And by counting the number of years between the fires, looking at how regular they occur, all of this data has been fed into forest management strategies so that we can mitigate against more aggressive wildfire. So there's a lot of data that is pulled out of trees in this way. Occasionally, we get a crime scene. Let me show you this wonderful tree. Let's zoom in on it. Has anyone got a clue what the crime scene's all about? Well, let me show you. In May, 1944, this tree was shot, not once, but twice, and the bullets lodged in the wood. But the tree actually didn't mind too much. It was only like a woodpecker, and it carried on growing until 2005 when it died of natural causes. Just occasionally we get something like that. Now, I hope I have some volcano fans in the audience. Thank you. Okay. So I'm a massive volcano fan. In fact, the reason I'm in tree ring science is because of volcanoes. When I was a kid, I loved volcanoes. Then I started studying archaeology, and then I got frustrated because I was really interested as an archaeologist in the impact that volcanoes have on people. And I was frustrated because none of these volcanoes I was studying had very good dates. And if you haven't got a date for when it actually happened, how can you really tell what it did? So that's how I found tree rings, because there's this neat way that you can use a tree ring to date a volcano. And it comes through this connection with climate. So when a volcano erupts and it pushes up all that ash and sulfate into the stratosphere, and what the sulfate does is it forms like a shield. And so the solar radiation comes in, and then it bounces back out again. And what this does is it can switch the climate system really suddenly. So the tree can be happily growing, as it normally does at a particular time of year, and then suddenly, bam, frost, cold event, and it gets really bad for the tree. And I'm going to show you my favorite trees now. So these are the longest living organisms on the planet. This is the White Mountain bristlecone pine, White Mountains of California. They're the most amazing ancient trees. I have had the privilege of going up there and sampling material off the ground around these trees. And it's amazing because you're walking past trees that were growing as they were putting the pyramids up in Egypt. Some of these trees are 5,000 years old and they're still growing. They're incredible. And as you walk around sampling, or you get a sample back to the lab and you polish it up, sometimes you see in it these little dark bands. Can you see them? These little dark bands. And it's a sign that something really dramatic happened to these trees. And if we zoom in on that cell structure, like we just looked at before, and you can see this year, really nice normal growth. The cells are all orderly and organized. And next year, really nice normal growth, same thing. And then what happened? Okay, what happened was kind of like, well, it's kind of the same reason the last few weeks in Tucson when we've been getting these frosts, maybe you've popped out and checked the lagging on those pipes outside because you don't want them to burst when they freeze. But imagine your tree and it's there and it's growing and then suddenly there's a frost and those cells basically get frozen and it permanently deforms the record within the tree ring structure. And back in the 70s and 80s, researchers in the tree ring lab began to realize that these things happen quite regularly within sort of 9,000 years of this bristlecone pine record. And when they contacted colleagues in the ice cores community, so the ice cores, there are teams of people who go and drill these big cores down through the polar ice sheets. And as the ice is built up in layers through time, that's in layers too, and it has bands in it. And they began to suspect that there's this volcanoes climate connection because you had layers of volcanic acid in the ice, and it seemed to line up with these structures in the tree rings. And this is my friend, my colleague Michael Siegel, and he's holding a piece of ice core. And Michael did a really amazing paper in 2015. It's one of my favorite research papers. And it really confirmed the correlation between those frost rings and layers of sulfate and occasionally bits of volcanic ash in the ice core records. And he confirmed it very strongly for the last 2,500 years. So that suddenly meant a whole load of volcanoes that hadn't been reliably dated before were now dated. And as an archaeologist, I'm very, very happy about that because anywhere you find an ash layer from a volcano at your archaeological site, it is a time marker. And in this example, I've actually got the Mount Mazama ash. This is a core that was taken by the USGS in Yellowstone Lake, Yellowstone National Park. Mazama is the ash that was spread across the region when Crater Lake, Oregon, was formed. And it's a massive area. So look, we've got Mazama, we've got Yellowstone. It's about 500 miles to give you scale for how far that ash is going. And the whole of that region is carpeted in ash. So it's a really important time marker. Be absolutely brilliant to have an exact calendar date for this particular eruption. So I'm now going to segue slightly because this is a cool thing. So this is my colleague Brian Black from the Tree Ring Lab, and he's looking very, very happy. I'm going to make you slightly seasick as I show you why he's looking happy. So this is from the field. That's that piece of wood that he's looking at. It's buried in the Mount Mazama ash. And on the outer edge there, you will see it's the fully intact outer tree ring and the bark. And when we got it back to the lab and tidied it up, can you see that? Can you see the bark? You see the tree rings? Can you see the outermost tree ring preserved under the bark? We're very excited because this tree was killed by Mount Mazama. It was carbonized in situ. That is the year of the Mount Mazama eruption. So please check back in with the Tree Ring Lab in about 6 months, and hopefully we'll know what calendar year that is. Okay, and so this is the great thing about tree rings. They have many, many uses in many different contexts, and that's the tip of the iceberg. But we need to get on, because you're probably wondering, where are the twists? We came here for twists. We've not had any twists yet, so let's get into that. Now, it's probably not a twist that Leonardo da Vinci actually was the first person to sort of formalize those basic principles of tree ring research. In his notebook on the rule of trees, he writes the very principles that we base our entire science on. And other people over the years wrote a little bit about that too, but it wasn't until the 1920s, here at the University of Arizona, and Andrew Ellicott Douglas, that the techniques of tree ring science were formalized, and the science itself was born. And the interesting thing about Douglas is you might think, oh, well, yeah, you know, he was probably a forester or somebody who worked with trees all the time, but he wasn't. He was an astronomer. And his primary interest was not trees at all. It was the sun. And he was particularly interested in the cycles of activity of the sun. So as the sun goes through phases of being more and less active, what you can observe from Earth are these dark patches on the surface of the sun called sunspots. And when you're in a solar maximum, at the peak of the cycle, you see a lot of sunspots. And when you're in a minimum, you don't see many. And these occur on a sort of 11-year sequence. And they were something that actually Da Vinci would have known about these too, because they had been recorded for a long period of time. People had been making notes of them all around the world. And so this was something that was very much known about in Douglas's day. And people were already asking the sorts of questions we're still interested in today. So what effect does the sun have on climate? And in Douglas's case, his particular question was, when there are lots of sunspots in the solar maximum, is that when we have droughts in arid regions? And you can imagine him sort of walking around, and I like to think of him sort of strolling past some logs and going, oh, look at that, and reminding himself that the patterns in the logs reflect these climate signals, and maybe thinking, yeah, tree rings, they could have the answer. And so he began to get into tree ring science. And he was a really interesting person in that he was I think they call it an early adopter. You know, he was one of these people who would be the first person to have the new iPhone, or, you know, he would get into, if stuff was available, he would get hold of it and he would use it. And he used photography a lot in his work in astronomy. And he also made teaching movies. I'm going to show you one of his teaching movies because it's just as applicable today as it was when he made it. So this is Shulman, and this is Edward Shulman with Douglas. And Edward Shulman's one of my heroes also because he did a lot of work with the bristlecone forest. And this is him demonstrating how to core a tree up on Mount Lemmon. I hope, it's going to work. Now, for anyone who's been waiting for a twist that transformed science, behold, okay, the twist. Now, so he's twisting this corer into the tree. And as he twists the core into the tree, it's kind of taking a little cylinder, like a dowel of wood out of the tree. Then he's going to put this thing we call it a spoon. It's not really a spoon, but you put it into there, twist it, and now we can pull out the core. And now, what I really love about this is then Douglas goes to the effort of going to the lab, sanding it down, and then he clips to it. There it is, the finished sanded core with its tree rings. Fully visible. And it's exactly what we do today. It's exactly the start of the process that we have today with those living trees. So, that was where he began. By 1914, word had started to get about this professor at the University of Arizona who's doing this work with these tree ring patterns. And Clark Whistler of the American Natural History Museum saw a massive opportunity. Because at the time, there was a very big problem. And today, we're used to kind of hearing on the news that something is 5,000 years old, or something was built in 1916, or we're used to having dates. We're used to having that sort of information. But back then, they didn't. The history of the Southwest was this blur of, well, that's pre-Columbian. So there's Whistler, and he's very interested in whether the tree ring technique can be applied on the ancestral sites of the Southwest, because archaeologists were going to these places. They're looking at this incredible architecture, the signs of a very sophisticated culture, and it's driving them crazy because they don't know when these people built these buildings, and they want to know how these sites are connected. And so there was a lot of preserved wood at the sites. And I just want to pause because I want to acknowledge that this story ancestral sites, and he also went and lived in the villages, and he sampled from people's homes, and the indigenous people have ownership of these discoveries that were made through access to these materials. So, here we are. We're there in 1929, and it started well, it was going well. He started matching patterns between these different sites. And this helped a bit, because now he can say, well, this particular site was built 20 years before this particular site, or this particular room was added on in a phase of extension 10 years after this room. So he can now talk about things at the sites in terms of years, but they're still pre-Columbian. That's it. So we've still got a problem, but it all comes together in 1929. And I love this story. So we get to go on this trip to 1929 because Emil Howry, another very big name on the U of A campus, obviously head of the Arizona State Museum, Emil Howry is one of a group of archaeologists who is with Douglas in June 18th, 1929, and they are in Show Low. Who has been to Show Low? Okay, you need to go to Show Low. When you go to Show Low, I need you to do something. I need you to go to the McDonald's car park. Right? No? In the McDonald's car park, I want you to stand there, and I want you to think that you stand upon the ground from which was retrieved what in dendrochronology we refer to as the Rosetta Stone of dendrochronology. The missing piece in Douglas's jigsaw comes out of the ground in Show Low, Arizona. That's it. And they weren't terribly impressed at the moment that it came out of the ground, but all that changed soon after, and Howry tells us all about it. So he tells us how Douglas immediately retired to a nearby shed, commandeered as a laboratory, and proceeded to do a quick field analysis. I love telling my students this. I find it inspiring. I one day hope to commandeer a shed myself. What happens next is Howry paints us this really lovely picture. So imagine it's a tin hut, lamplight flickering. He tells how Douglas moves this table to the center of the room, and he's got his strips of paper and his pieces of wood. And then the archaeologists are probably over here somewhere, and they're all sitting. And he tells us how nobody says a word. They don't want to interrupt. Something big is clearly happening. Okay. And then we start to get data. And Douglas says, you know what? I think we've got a position, a pattern match for this sample from Show Low, and it's at the oldest part of the securely dated chronology. So that's good. That's where he wants it to be. So it goes in there. And there's this long pause, and then finally, I think we have it. Yes? No one spoke. Douglas was busy making mental calculations. He broke the silence. And then he unfurls, for the first time ever heard, the calendar dated in calendar years history of the American Southwest. And Pueblo Bonito goes from being pre-Columbian to being 11th and 12th centuries. And Mesa Verde, Batatican, and Keat Seal are found to be a little younger, from the 13th century. And suddenly everything is organized in calendar time. And it's a big moment. And it's a big twist, right? Because this started off being about the sun. And this is not about the sun, but it's big because it gives a calendar-dated history for this incredible region and the incredible cultures of this region. And it goes into National Geographic. And National Geographic is then circulated around the world. And it found dendrochronology because people read how this application has worked. And it's such a dramatic demonstration of how good this can be that lots of people start working on tree ring chronologies and applying them. So if you're ever in an antique shop, keep your eyes out for National Geographic 1929. You can often pick one up. It's really good. The other thing in this article, and it's really a lovely article ahead of its time, is the first kind of use of a tree ring as a proxy record. Now, that's a bit of jargon that I'll just get into in a minute. But basically, a proxy is a substitute. It's saying the tree rings can be a substitute for a record of climate. And so in the paper, he shows this core, and he shows that he's got a tiny, narrow band, and he says that's a drought, and a wide series of tree rings, and that's when it's wet. And then he gets into the connections of, well, he takes it those extra steps, and this is what we do all the time today. One of the most important roles of tree ring research is as providing this record of climate through time. And I just want to mention this particularly because we've all seen a lot of statements like this, right? The drought was unprecedented in thousands of years. And I'm a parent, and I worry about how to teach my children to navigate through information and misinformation. And the proxy record, understanding it, is a really powerful way of understanding how a statement like this, made by, and this is an IPCC report statement put together by scientists from 80 countries, and the basis for statements like this is often proxy records. And I'll just quickly go into it for you. So we start with a measured record, something that's undeniable. So let's imagine we've all just been out for the last 10 years and we've been collecting rainfall measurements, and we have our averaged data set. Nothing ambiguous about it, it's just data, right? But we want to know if the drought we're in now has happened before. So we really want a record of data that goes back a lot further into the past. So we find something that can be a proxy for our measurement of rainfall. And so this is where tree rings can come in and be really powerfully used. And what we would do is we would study the present growth, we would study the data of the rainfall, and we would do a reconstruction. And if our reconstruction, so you see those two lines match really well. So it's vital that the reconstruction matches the measured data perfectly. But once it does, and once you're sure of it in the present, that means you can use the rest of your proxy reconstruction. And that is only limited by the length of whatever your proxy is. So if your tree ring record is 9,000 years, then your proxy record will be 9,000 years. So that's how we use it. And when you see one of those statements made by scientists, you can bank that it's not exaggeration for effect, it's based on proxy data like this. Okay, back to Douglas and the solar cycles. This is all well and good, right? But what about the sun? Well, Douglas was, as I said before, he kind of ahead of his time, wanting new technology, and he was rather frustrated that no one had invented computers yet. So he decided that he would build one of his own, and what you see behind me is his cycloscope. He spent a long time developing the cycloscope, and it was made, basically it's an analog computer. It was made to churn through data sets. Behind him you see those patterns, those are tree ring patterns. And the idea was it would try and reveal the solar cycle. And again, I'm going to show you some of his footage. This is my favorite of all of his footage. It's a really nice example of a woman in science in the early days. I'm still trying to trace the identity of the lady in question, but what she's doing is helping him make a demonstration video. You know, those are his notes. He is explaining for the record how his cycloscope works and what you do with it. And she's holding up one of these long cutout strips with the tree ring sequences on it. So, and that takes a lot of doing. As I discovered a couple of years ago, when I had this brilliant, I was working with this brilliant PhD student, Nick Bowman. He's up here. And over here is Shulman again. So this is a bit of Douglas's film of Shulman operating the cycloscope. And Nick was really desperate to get the cycloscope up and running again. And once he had, we thought, oh, well, we'll just have a bit of fun. So here's our bit of fun. So the light shines through those cutouts, and what they've got there is a mirror, and the mirror kind of moves up and down on the stage, and the light shines through those patterns and into the mirror and then back through the lenses, and you end up being able to see the cycles. Anyway, it's a really cool thing, and we have it in the tree ring lab, and we're still trying to think of ways that we could use it a little bit better. Douglas's story is pretty typical, well, apart from the fact that he had a massive success and invented tree ring science. Apart from that, his story is typical of science in that there were lots of low points, because there are a lot of low points. When it goes well and you see something and you think, I could be the first person seeing this, it's amazing being a scientist. But more often, you're kind of down in a pit, slogging away at something that absolutely doesn't work and was ridiculous, and why did you think of that in the first place? How stupid. And it's comforting to know that Douglas had these moments also. Because, and we know this because of notes that were taken in the lab and written down, but we know that at one point he nearly threw it all in. That's it, I've had enough. This is stupid, basically. He was highly dejected. And the reason was he thought he was getting somewhere. He'd got these two 500-year tree ring sequences. And he thought he could see the solar cycle in areas of these sequences. But then there's this time period between 1645 and 1750, and it just all went completely to pieces. Didn't work at all. And he was just so frustrated, he basically said, you know, that's it. I'm going to stop now. We've had a good run. There we go. But then something amazing happened. So there's another astronomer, and he's called Edward Maunder, and he's in the UK. And he's heard that Douglas is messing around with tree rings, trying to find the solar cycle. And he needs to write to him, so he writes to him, to tell him that he is deeply, deeply wrong if he can see solar cycles between 1645 and 1715. So he shouldn't be able to see solar cycles in that time period. And if he can, he's deeply, deeply wrong. And Douglas, meanwhile, is thinking, I'm deeply, deeply wrong. I cannot see solar cycles between 1645 and 1715. Because Maunder had been studying the historic records, trying to ascend that observed record of solar activity through time backwards. And he had discovered, in a period of time that we don't know as the Maunder minimum, there's a complete breakdown in the solar cycle. And therefore, Douglas shouldn't have been seeing cycles at all. And the fact that he wasn't, and so this is the best thing that can happen in science. Somebody completely unrelated to your project approaches the same problem that you're approaching it and proves that you have reached the right conclusion, because it gives you confidence that you might actually be onto something. And this was enough to keep him going for the rest of his career. And he moved through, he continued searching for that solar cycle for his whole life. And in the end, he never quite proved it. He never quite clinched it, never quite got it. But in parallel, there's this new science, and it's developing, and it's going to change everything. And the science is radiocarbon dating. And so if you have heard dates like, oh, that's 4,600 years old, chances are it's probably radiocarbon dated if they haven't used tree rings. So the advantage of radiocarbon dating is it can be used today, anything in the last 40,000 years that has carbon in it. So it has slightly broader dating applications, but it's not as precise as tree rings. All right. Radiocarbon now. Bit of physics, bit of chemistry. No. I just want to tell you how it's formed. Radiocarbon forms in the atmosphere as cosmic radiation comes in from space, and there are collisions between neutrons and nitrogen, and that leads to the production of carbon-14. That's an isotope of carbon, just a slightly different weight to carbon-13 and carbon-12. But all of those go in to anything green and growing on planet Earth, and anything that eats the green and growing stuff on planet Earth. So right now, outside, there's everything green and growing, has an equal amount of carbon in it, and I have lost my train of thought because the goat has thrown. I'll tell you why the goat's thrown me. It's because I'm so worried about this. I'm like, they're going to be upset about this goat. No. So at the moment, we have equal amounts of carbon because you're topping up the carbon which is in the atmosphere all the time. And at the point where something dies, it is like flipping over an hourglass because carbon-14 is radioactive. And that radioactive element can't stay as it is. It has to decay. So the instant you stop taking it up, it starts to decay. And what Willard Libby had discovered and led him to the development of radiocarbon dating was the half-life, how long it takes for half the radiocarbon from as it is now to be gone. And that allowed him to mathematically then calculate the age of something by measuring how much carbon has it got in it now. So this is something that is from a long time ago. How much carbon has it got in it? Right, let's have a look where that plots on the curve. Okay, it's 13,000 years old. So that's how it works. But Libby was smart enough to know that cosmic radiation has not been level through time. It has wiggled about. He very much expected that. And so then he's got a problem because you've got this beautiful mathematical equation and it works really nicely, but there's a problem because what you really need is something that can be dated by an entirely independent method and that locks up little capsules of carbon through time. So, where did he come? He came to the University of Arizona to the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research because he wanted some tree rings, some dated tree rings that he could use to improve the radiocarbon method. And in his Nobel Prize winning speech, he presents this curve. It's called the curve of knowns. And if you come to the Tree Ring Lab, you can see these two samples that were used in the curve of knowns. You can see them up on our wall. And he measured the radiocarbon in these known age samples. And he put those against the curve. And he showed that there was a need for what we call a calibration of the radiocarbon method, a way to make those dates mathematically calculated just that bit more accurate. And so ever since then, there's been this really neat feedback between these two dating methods, where the tree ring science has helped with the radiocarbon, and then we have that other feedback where we have trees that we can't link with our present chronologies through patterns, and then maybe we can use the radiocarbon to get an approximate date for them. So there's this really nice relationship between these two disciplines through time. And Douglas only missed this by like about a decade, kind of seeing this come together and seeing the kind of the difference that this could make to the sort of work that he was doing. So in the early days of radiocarbon, they were chopping up chunks of wood because you needed a lot to get a measurement. So 20-year blocks was fairly standard. And I'll show you what it looks like once they did that. So that's kind of what radiocarbon looks like through time, those wiggles through time. So there's something I haven't told you. I've not been entirely truthful. There is something I'm hiding. Hiding. This picture is not complete. So the thing that's causing those wiggles that controls that radiocarbon through time is, can anyone guess? I know that some of you know. It's the sun, right, it's the sun. So now we're on to something. This is what Douglas was trying to get into, and this is a nice twist. I like that twist. Okay. So by measuring the amount of radiocarbon from tree ring to tree ring, we can get an indication on what the sun is doing through time. And nowadays, we don't have to do big piles of wood to get one date, big, groups of 20 tree rings. We can peel off a single tree ring under the microscope, send that, and that's enough for analysis. And we're very, very, very excited because we've got one of these lovely instruments coming to the Tree Ring Lab in the next 6 months, and we're going to be able to do a lot more of this type of work. Now, thanks to a physicist called Fusamayaki, Since 2012, we've known there's really a lot of importance and urgency to convert the whole of that blue line I just showed you into single tree ring data. Because what Fusa discovered was that sometimes if you delve into the single tree rings, you find something really surprising. Generally, you'd see, slow, gradual changes of radiocarbon through time. But what she found was that in certain years, you get this massive jump. And this is a really profound finding, and it really is a transformative finding. And so this is what it looks like from her paper. And so if you were dating a seed, let's say, or a leaf from each of those 2 years where you see that big jump in series, to be equivalent to about 100 years different. So this is a massive pulse of 14C, and what's really amazing about it is any tree, anywhere in the world, in 774 and 775, you will see this anywhere in the world. And the other thing is, just to go very, very quickly back to the ice cores, as carbon-14 is produced in the atmosphere at the same time as a byproduct, well, as the same processes, you have beryllium-10. Beryllium-10 is raining out on the ice sheets, and in between your layers of volcanic acid and bits of volcanic ash, you've also got beryllium-10 patterns, and amazingly, they match with the wiggles of radiocarbon in tree rings. And that blows lots of scientific scenes wide open for future stuff. So these are really, really important in science, and they're a developing area. And there's a lot of debate about what causes these, which activity of the sun causes these big spikes. And I just thought you'd enjoy this because I've been talking for a while, so. Our amazing sun, our amazing active sun, incredible with this arc. Okay, let's move on. Back to our blue wiggly line, sorry. The thing about that event that I just showed you is that now we know there are at least 9 others. So 9 other points in this time period. So the 0 there is 1950. So these are all in years before 1950. So we know there have been 9 of these big events, big solar storms, solar flares, big solar energetic particle events, SCPs. We know that this is part of the continuous cycle of life on Earth. What we don't know is in these gaps in between them, if there are any more, because we don't have single year tree ring data in these gaps in between them yet. The irony is, all of the dates we've got so far, all the humans living on the planet would have seen would actually have been a spectacular light show. Probably people in the mid-latitudes who had never seen the aurora would see the aurora, but otherwise it wouldn't have done them very much harm. But today, we're somewhat more vulnerable. Well, we're a lot more vulnerable. We are, because of the way a lot of our lives are run from satellites out in space. And this means that these big solar events are actually something potentially quite devastating. In 1859, there's something called the Carrington event, and this is the last of these really big solar storm events on record, within the sort of written record, and we know that that took out telegraph systems. But now, a lot of governments are building in policy, people are watching, people are wanting to know more about what causes these events. What are the things that lead up to them? Are there clues that can help with prediction? And there's still a lot of work to be done really understanding what they all are and what they are caused by. So hopefully the work that we can do with single tree rings will feed into this and help with planning and mitigation for these kinds of events. And hopefully we'll be able to get in there and fill in all these gaps. And I just want to show you at the end of this sequence, there we go. We're just going to zoom in on this tiny time period, and I want to show you what the radiocarbon in single tree rings looks like. And it's not going to blow your mind, because it's just more blue wiggles. But I ask you to think about these blue wiggles. So this is based on single year data. It's using radiocarbon, carbon-14, to reconstruct solar activity through time. And do you know what the periodicity is of these cycles? Let's put the record of the sunspots on top of it. Okay? So you see where I've gone with this. So this is where we've got to today. We can dig really, really deep into each of these tree rings in 13,000 years worth of tree rings that are available in continuous sequence. And we can learn things about the sun that we've not learned before. I'm going to show you this. So I think when this paper came out, which said in 2021, here we go, we've got solar cycles, I just thought of Douglas and I thought how pleased he would be to know that he was right. He was just ahead of his time. The technique to find the solar cycles hadn't been invented yet. And I find that, that's comforting scientifically to feel like you're part of this massive ongoing jigsaw. And you put a little piece in, and it might be a really random piece, and it doesn't look like it's going to make sense at any point in time. And maybe it doesn't in your lifetime, but maybe in somebody else's it does. And it's super exciting work. It was a PhD student who published this paper. He's now a postdoc in the Tree Ring Lab. And this week we've been looking at the 11-year solar cycle in the Bronze Age, so 3,500 years ago. And that solar cycle is really, really strong in the Bronze Age. It's a really consistent sun, and we're sort of looking into could that have had any effect on people? Well, we don't know. But the more we get the chance to get into this kind of data, the more we have chance to find out. And we're building a facility called a Time Facility in the Tree Ring Lab, and this is going to be one of our primary foci. And, you've all been very patient, so I should thank you and wish you a happy Valentine's Day.
Well, I just want to say it is absolutely thrilling being a scientist. And from Andrew Ellicott Douglas to Charlotte Pearson, I really think the audience got to feel some of that thrill tonight. So thank you, Charlotte, for giving such a wonderful lecture. And of course, I'd like to invite you all to join us for next Wednesday's lecture series presentation featuring Dr. Sarah Moran from the Lunar and Planetary Lab. And Sarah's going to share a little bit more about her talk for next week in a little presentation here.
Hello at the Lunar and Planetary Laboratory here at the University of Arizona. I hope you enjoyed tonight's talk by my colleague, Charlotte Pearson, and I hope you'll join us next Wednesday evening as I share my research on the atmospheres of planets beyond our solar system. I'll discuss what we know about the clouds and chemistry of these other worlds, and the exotic materials that they're made of. I'll also look toward our prospects for finding the building blocks of life as we know it beyond Earth. We hope to see you next week.
So I just want to thank you all again for joining us tonight on Valentine's, and please be safe on your trip home.